told you what did this to me, and it's not human.
An alien predator has discovered the ultimate feeding ground.
Although edited for television, tonight's thriller contains scenes of suspense and violence which may be unsuitable for young viewers. Parental discretion is advised.
And now we can go into one of the deeper ones. Let's look at Aliens Kidnapped.
Oh, man.
Aliens Kidnapped #1 was released on December 17th, 1997, as per Mike's Amazing World of Comics, with 5 unanimous supporting sources. It ranked 171st in units, 174th in dollars. It was the 7th ranked Dark Horse title of the month, after Star Wars Crimson Empire #1 at 51st place, Star Wars Last Command #2 in 80th, Star Wars X-Wing Rogue Squadron #0 in 107th place, Hellboy Christmas Special in 134th, Martha Washington Saves the World #1 in 143rd, and Predator vs. Judge Dredd #3 in 159th. Diamond Comic Distributors report sales of 17,155 units. It lagged behind Marvel's Star Trek comics and a bit below Vertigo titles like Hellblazer and House of Secrets. Notable comics this month include DC's New Year's Evil and Marvel's Heroes Return titles Iron Man and the Avengers. Solicitation copy reads, "In the dark reaches of the universe lies a remote planet that holds both forbidden pleasures and unspeakable horrors. For 3 naive smugglers, it's also a place to unload some deadly cargo, an alien egg. But something about this egg is scaring off the black marketers. And when it hatches, the nightmare's just begun." I'm going to be lazy and just read the plot synopsis from Xenopedia. On a distant planet, a group of smugglers infiltrate the remains of a ship and encounter a xenomorph queen. After the latter is promptly dispatched by the other 2 after killing one of the men, they procure several of the queen's eggs, one of them being a bizarre ovomorph with a sickly pink color scheme. The smugglers ultimately do a deal with a Gaianet scientist who pays them handsomely. However, he refuses to buy the pink egg, wary of the dangers that it might cause, and pays them extra to dispose of it. Going against his wishes, the 2 travel to Earth, which I don't think is accurate, and arrive at suburban shantytown Barabazan, intent on selling the egg on the black market to bar owner Uncle Saul. Though Saul initially declines, he ultimately purchases the egg after believing that media personality and host of the TV show Goad, Daryl Zither, may take interest.
I did try after you said you're trying to figure out what was being kidnapped. I don't know. Like, I really think so. I think I like this story.
I have to say, what I think is they must have registered a trademark, or somebody had already done the logo treatment for them. And so it's like, okay, this story is going to be called Kidnapped, and just nobody gave a rat's ass about having any fidelity to that title or having that title be relevant to anything. It would be such a stretch to identify any action in this story as having anything to do with the concept of a kidnapping, that it's like, what do you even, like, I really wish they just like recycled that for somebody else to do a story that had anything to do with the concept of kidnapping. Nothing in this thing has anything. It's there are so many alien stories that have something like that, or even just the whole thing with like the forced impregnation, like you're kidnapping that person's body. Like there's some like thin way of making that connect, and it just absolutely does not work for this story at all. Though there's just no. This is the worst possible story you could apply this title to.
Right. Well, I think my theory is that Woodring and Green agreed to do this, and their pitch was there's some mercenaries and they kidnap an alien egg, and then that was the pitch, and then they just riffed on the whole rest of it, and without an outline or an end in mind, because there's no way. The only thing that is anything to do with kidnapping is either you could say it's that first egg and they end up taking like 12 other ones too, or you could say there is a kind of like a thematic element to each issue, where the first issue is like these boots on the ground proletariat working people, and then the second issue is all the, I don't know if like they're the 1%ers necessarily, but they're like this elite kind of wealthier class of people, and then the third issue is all bureaucracy and like military and government. And so maybe there's like a class thing, like a kidnapped, based on how everybody ends up at the end of it.
They kidnapped our economy.
Maybe, yeah. I mean,
no,
but that's a stretch, right? That's a huge stretch.
Look, I'm a literary Philistine, so I'm not familiar with the Robert Lawrence Stevenson book. book. Are you familiar with the book Kidnapped? Is there any parallel there? I thought that maybe that's what they were referencing, but
I don't think so.
isn't that a pirate thing?
I believe that it is.
Yeah. So
Only based on my limited memories of Classics Illustrated.
Jim Woodring grew up in a conservative household in the 1950s, suffering from frequent and intense visual hallucinations, mild autism, and behavioral issues. Woodring struggled to channel his neurodivergence into artistic expression through his mid-20s, before finally achieving something satisfying enough to feel viable as a cartoonist. After years of menial labor, he was convinced by a friend to apply for work at Ruby Spears Animation, where he was mentored by greats like Jack Kirby and Gil Kane, while producing crap like Mr. T, Rubik the Amazing Cube, and Turbo Teen. Woodring hooked up with Fantagraphics around 1987 and was featured in their short-lived premium anthology titled Prime Cuts. His own single creator anthology followed, simply titled Jim, running 4 issues. In 1990, he was on the Kitchen Sink Press anthology Buzz, which only made it 3 issues. In 1992, he shared the showcase Tantalizing Stories with Mark Martin and offered Frank in the River, a continuation of the silent, surreal cartoon adventures of a rodent that would become the character with whom Woodring was most associated. That same year, he worked on a 4-issue adaptation of Todd Browning's 1932 cult favorite, Freaks. In 1993, Woodring produced work for Heavy Metal Magazine and began an association with Dark Horse that would carry through the rest of the decade, working on licensed properties like Star Wars and Aliens, including the serial Backsplash and the miniseries Labyrinth. Fantagraphics also offered a second series of the Jim anthology, lasting 6 issues, as well as collections of the Frank short stories, and then a spin-off miniseries. In the 21st century, Woodring was embraced by the fine art community for his paintings, and has enjoyed success within that world, though he remains committed to his Frank character and comic art. So tell me this, did you have any past experience with Jim Woodring? Or Justin Green, actually? See, and I got messed up because at first I was thinking Justin Gray, the guy who used to work with Jimmy Palmiotti. I don't know Justin Green from Adam.
So I didn't either, but it was like it's one of these tragedies because Woodring I know, and he's one of my favorite comics creators, period. Like the stuff that he produces himself, love it. Like I've got autographed prints of his hanging up on the wall behind me. He's fantastic. And the thing that makes him an A+ creator in my mind is that he uses simplicity to deceive the reader in almost everything in the stuff that he writes and draws. Anyway, he'll do stuff where you could, in one of his wordless comics, burn through it in seconds instead of minutes. You could just go panel to panel to panel. What happened here? Some indeterminate mammal went into a house. He met a frog, took a flute out of its trunk, and went home. And what the hell kind of story is that? But the depth, detail he puts into those comics, it's almost like the more you put into it, the more you'll get out of it. And you'll realize that disparate elements connect across the story or across other stories, reoccurring things. And it's really, I think he's a fantastic creator when he's writing and drawing his own stuff. And when he's just writing it, like I read some of the Jabba the Hutt stuff. I liked it quite a bit, but it didn't resonate like the stuff that he does himself. And this, it felt more like that, but I enjoy the story. I enjoy the comic, but I almost enjoyed trying to figure out how this came together as much as I enjoyed the actual story. There's stuff in here where it's either he just gave the artist like a loose direction and then he customized the dialogue to what the art ended up being, like Marvel style, or did he give this guy just insane detail, knowing that he was going to draw exactly what he asked him to, and then the script was going to make sense. You know what I mean? Like trying to solve the puzzle around how this came together. I thought it's a very fun comic.
He did Jim, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And so I remember reading a little bit about that in the 90s. It was over my head though, unfortunately. He also did he do Eno and Plume?
Oh, I don't know.
Trying to see. I was just looking through a quick biography, but it didn't go into that. Anyway, so I had limited exposure to Jim Woodring. I know that he's done either Predator or Alien stuff that we've covered on the podcast in the past, and I know that he's well respected. I want to say he passed away not so long ago too. I don't see that listed in the listing here, but I'm pretty sure I remember that happening. Man. Didn't it? Am I mistaken in that?
I hope not. I think he's still going. I think he's in his 70s, but I think he's still. Oh man, if he's dead and I don't know it, oh man, I hope not.
No, he's still around. He's 71.
Okay, good.
Yeah. What's the difference between Jim and Frank too? I'm familiar, or I have a passing familiarity with these things, but are they the same thing, or are they do different things?
So Frank is the character who looks like a little cat, and Jim is the name of the anthology series he did off featuring.
Okay. No, okay, I'm confused. Eno and Plum was Terry Laban, so that is a book that I read.
Oh,
that's not the same thing.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. And then again, looking at the biographies on Xenopedia, so apparently Justin Green is the guy who did Biggie Brown Meets the Holy Virgin Mary back in 1972, and I think that Strange Brain Parts, aka Overlord Comics, did a video on that fairly recently, but it's not one of the ones I actually watched. It sucks too, because that's like the only other Discord that I'm on, but I don't watch all the videos because I don't have necessarily an interest in everything. But this guy apparently was a big guy in the 70s, independent underground scene. He worked on Arcade. He worked on Young Lust. So this is another counterculture guy. Francisco Solano Lopez, often billed as F. Solano Lopez, is among the great Argentine comic artists. His political work with Hector Herman Oesterheld on the 1957 sci-fi series The Eternaut prompted him to twice flee authorities to produce work in exile in Spain on various projects for foreign publishers. Notably, he was one of British publisher IPC's regulars on strips like Kelly's Eye and Janus Stark. In 1968, he returned to Argentina to work on a sequel to El Eternauta, only to have to flee again within the next decade from political persecution. Going into the 1980s, Solano Lopez continued to have work in European anthologies, dabbling with Fleetway and Heavy Metal magazine. His relationship with Fantagraphics began in 1987 when they serialized his anti-fascist strip with Gabriel Lopez, Ana, in Prime Cuts, and later collected it as a single volume in 1991. That same year, Fantagraphics' erotic imprint, Eros Comics, began publishing The Young Witches as a periodical. This was followed by the miniseries Razor Guts for their short-lived Monster Comics imprint. This line was mostly dedicated to Universal Monsters adjacent comics and provided the first pairing of Solano Lopez with Jim Woodring on that loose and rather graphic adaptation of Todd Browning's Freaks. Mid-decade, Solano Lopez moved to Dark Horse for cover work and some contributions to their own Dark Horse Presents anthology. That connection likely led to his working with Jerry Prosser on an adaptation of Bram Stoker's Burial of the Rats for the fly-by-night Roger Corman's Cosmic Comics. In 1995, he returned to Eros for the Young Witches sequel, London Babylon. In a 180, he was back at Dark Horse to launch The Real Adventures of Johnny Quest with Omaha the Cat Dancer's Kate Worley. Then came Aliens Kidnap, followed by a third Young Witches miniseries, Empire of Sin, and in 2001, Sexy Symphonies. He was more or less retired in his last decade and passed away in 2011. And then Francisco Solano Lopez I recognized pretty quickly. I didn't need to research it, unfortunately, because I sold comics in the 90s, and among those comics were definitely Eros comics. And so this guy's got a whole biography where his work goes back to the 1950s, it looks like, and he's apparently one of the most famous Argentine artists ever. But the stuff I know him from is his porno stuff from the 90s at Eros, particularly Young Witches and Sexy Symphonies. This is a guy who to some degree recalls Manara. I don't think he's at Manara's level, but he definitely has a similarity, and certainly the color work recalls Manara. So I definitely enjoy his work, but there was elements of the story that were more provocative than the plot supports. And you can definitely tell this is one of those deals. You were sending me something from an artist recently where they made a point of saying you can do an alien story, you can do a Terminator story, but no nudity. And there's a guy who would probably benefit from the nudity. He definitely takes advantage of some sexually suggestive circumstances, but he never takes it all the way to a Young Witch's place. But you can also tell that he's not giving the work the same level of detail and care that he does on his adult-oriented material. So it feels a little like a half measure, but what I feel like is these are three guys with underground indie credentials who are taking the piss. And I definitely feel like the way that it reads to me is, you may remember that in 79, Heavy Metal Magazine did the adaptation of the Alien movie with Archie Goodwin and Walt Simonson. Yeah. And I'm thinking, well, if they'd held on to the license and they'd continue to do alien stories in Heavy Metal Magazine, they'd have probably turned out something like this. This sort of reminds me of the sort of stuff that Veitch and Bissett would have been doing in that time period. I think it's definitely them just like goofing, and I really feel like that's shambolic, where it gets to where it's going, but it's not going there in a straight line, and there's just a lot of repetitive motifs. So I really do feel like they're kind of just goofing and riffing and jamming with each other issue before they bring it to some kind of resolution. But I don't think that I don't think this was a tightly plotted matter. And I don't think that they necessarily went Marvel style, but there may have been elements of that. I do think there's probably a bunch of guys getting on the phone and BSing and coming up with the bare bones of the story. And that's what Lopez is drawing through most of the issues.
Yeah. And I didn't realize he was the Young Witches guy, but
you can see it now though, huh?
I think, I don't know if I need to become more familiar with his work, because if this is a half measure, this is fantastic. I think it has like a Manara vibe, like you said. I think it has a little bit of like a Richard Corbin. Yeah,
there's definitely some strong Corbin in there.
Oh my God, I'm blanking. Who's the guy who did Strontium Dog?
You talking? Strontium Dog. For a second there, I was saying Arthur Sidon, but not him. It's I'm not sure. I'd have to look it up.
It reminds me of it, like something about like the jawlines of some of these guys has that kind of like Judge Dredd.
Oh, definitely
kind
a
of,
Carlos Esquerra quality to it. Yeah, no.
Yeah.
And yeah, he is the guy who did Strontium Dog. Yeah, okay. I wasn't sure. I had to look it up, but yeah, it is Esquerra.
Yeah, I think it's the detail is amazing. It's just that first page where those, I don't know what those, like mercenaries redneck like colonial marines via Zartans, dreadnoughts. It's just crazy. They look like just nuts. And then that guy, he's got that bald spot on the back of his head. You're like, maybe this is just future time
alopecia.
Or something. But
or he's a monk that felt backslid or something.
But he's the guy who, when they go to that trash planet or island or whatever it is, they make him eat his own brain. He's like, I was so high on bugs, they had made me eat my own brain.
Well, and you got the bit too where it's like, I'm not going to go back. I'm not going to let them do that to me again. And toward the end of the issue, you see they're letting him do it. He's going all over it again. They're cutting more hair off so he can have some more bit of his brain. Go all Ray Liotta on it.
Yeah, that made me laugh out loud. I thought that was just fantastic. But there's like that detail.
Well, I mean, even more than the actual Heavy Metal comic books, this reminds me of the Heavy Metal movie. The vibe to it of the guys who are stoners who are flying around in the big smiley face spaceship. It's very much got that vibe, and it very much feels like, hey, Dan O'Bannon was influenced by this material. What if Dan O'Bannon had actually done some Heavy Metal comics with this concept? That's what it feels like.
Yeah.
Aliens Kidnapped #2 was released on January 28th, 1998, and rose to 5th place among Dark Horse titles, while dropping to 15,820 copies in actual sales. Solicitation copy reads, "The contaminated alien egg has hatched and has become the problem of media personality Hank Zither. The playing unknowing host to a chest burster isn't enough to cancel his trip to a new pleasure planet with sexy Ivy Derringer. Zither thinks he's only caught a nasty bug. He doesn't know the half of it, and neither do the planet's unsuspecting inhabitants, who are about to have a full-scale alien epidemic on their hands." Back to Xenopedia, Zither has the billionaire CEO of her company Skank, Ivy Derringer, as a guest host on an episode of Goat, the latter promoting her luxury resort of Celeste and inviting Zither to join her as a guest. After the interview, Zither travels to Uncle Saul's bar, where he is shown the pink egg. Suddenly, a facehugger leaps out of the egg and subdues him. His two bodyguards force to drag him and dump him back to his apartment. Later, Zither awakens to see Derringer, who arrived at his place to pick him up and escorts him to her shuttle. Ivy takes Zither to her room, where she attempts to initiate intercourse, but a large chest burster suddenly bursts out of Zither's chest and attacks and kills Derringer. Several hours after landing on Celeste, the chest burster kills the ship's captain before leaving the ship and going on a killing spree within the resort, leaving a slimy pink trail wherever it goes.
That Borderline was a human story with aliens as the backdrop. This feels like this is some gonzo Jim Woodring story, and with the idea of aliens ostensibly as the backdrop. You know what I mean? Like, I think it would, I don't know if it's an aliens story, especially considering how it ends, but it's fun.
Yeah, I mean, again, we talked about the story that Bo Smith and Gray Morrow did, where the alien aspect is incidental. It could have been, an engine attack or something. It'd have been the same difference. Right. And then with this one, you've got this rabid, arrested development alien where it's a chest burster that never evolves into a larger form. And of course, it's excretion, a snail trail that it carries around with it, that when it dries and turns into a powder, when it's inhaled and affects people, causes them to go mad and then eventually spontaneously combust. This is not stuff that we deal with xenomorphs. They've carved their story into an alien story when it's really, really not.
Right, yeah. And there's a lot of, I don't want to say like red flags, but the idea that these dreadnoughts can just go around and like pick up these alien eggs, they're just going to pick them up and load them into their ship with nets. Like, is that a thing?
Right.
That would happen? I don't know.
Well, and they're doing the bit where they freeze them. They flash freeze them as well. And that does feel a little bit like all the Xenozip days that they've, we've moved so far past this. Like, oh yeah, that was a thing. They were making the drug out of the royal jelly and all that kind of stuff. So you do feel like there's maybe an influence there, but it's just as likely that they were doing drug references because that's what these guys were going to do anyway.
Right. Yeah. And I just, the detail in this, in this first issue, especially with the working class guys, the panel where in the middle of the page, this is one of the prime example of me enjoying it, but then wondering what the heck happened, where it's only like 4 pages in, and there's a panel in the middle of the page where there's like these lizard guys, like little gargoyles or little creatures in like an aquarium or terrarium or something, and the dreadnoughts are pushing the frozen cart of eggs past them, and it took me out of the story at first. I'm like, they have little tiny humanoid dragon guys as pets in the aliens stories.
Well, that's one of those things that drives me nuts too, and that's especially with these licenses. It's like they establish an aliens specifically, that there are other alien species that these humans interact with that we never seem to see in any of these stories. If you go to Xenopedia, they're constantly referencing this is one of the rare alien stories that has an alien that isn't a xenomorph. And it's like, I want to see more stuff like that, like expand the universe a little bit. But yeah, you're right. It feels weird because it's not what we're used to in these stories because they very rarely allow for this sort of thing.
Right. But the dialogue, so, you're reading this and you go like, oh, what the heck? Is there supposed to be little green alien or little reptile humanoids? And the dialogue is the one Dreadnought is saying, wow, look at that. And the other one says, cool it, you sound like a hick. I thought that one panel, it sets up the rest of the series. Are you going to see stuff that makes sense in the aliens world? You're going to see stuff that doesn't make sense in the aliens world, but cool it, you're going to sound like a hick. I thought that was priceless.
There's a lot of bait and switch to this whole miniseries because they've got those Killian Plunkett covers that are so deadly serious and so grim and dark. And this is a guy who's got a history with the Aliens franchise. So that they're trying to sell you this is going to be another Labyrinth. And it's so not, even though they're depicting things that happen in the story. Joss Whedon made that big deal about how they filmed his script for Alien Resurrection, but the tone was so completely wrong that everybody said their lines wrong and it was the wrong person being cast in the role. So it's like they said the words that I wrote down, but it was a different movie than I would have made. That's what this is. It's like we see on the second issue, you've got the chest burster for coming out of the guy who's the proprietor of the, basically the Mr. Beast or the Joe Rogan of the story.
Right.
But that's just it. It's like on that cover, he just looks like a typical alien antagonist, protagonist who's got a chest burster coming out of them. In story, it's a different matter. And it's like, well, I recognize that's the guy. That's the same guy, but he's being depicted in a way that in no way relates to the story. And so it's almost like, okay, the title doesn't have anything to do with the interiors. The artwork on the covers is selling you a story that you're not going to get. They did a collected version of this story that John Bolton did the covers for. John Bolton has no business being within a mile of the story. It's just like they're totally, I have to feel like too that like at some point the editor was probably like, what have you done to me? And they're like, look, it's the Argentinian guy that stuff didn't translate. We didn't mean him to come up with this. It's like that's just what he came up with. We got to work with what he gave us, right? It feels like they ran a scam on the editorial on this, and they just did like damage control instead of leaning into it.
Well, I was going to say I was wondering if the covers weren't done first, and that's how they ended up. Because the cover is representative of what happens until the third one. I don't know if that's a spoiler, but there's an alien on the cover of the third one, and there's no alien in the comic, right? It's like that little chest burster who's stunted from the fungus or whatever, but there's no climactic alien scene. I really think it was like they had these covers, these paintings in the file, and they're like, "Can you make a story out of this?" And they're like, "Sure," and they just were winging it. And they didn't land the third issue, but they had fun trying. Maybe. Yeah. I mean, I had fun reading it.
Yeah, I really think it's definitely fun. I'm very much in my post Aliens period. It's like I'm so sick of Aliens content, especially Aliens content that just keeps regurgitating the same elements, retelling the same stories over and over again. So it's a nice change of pace to get this underground comics take on Aliens. But it's also funny because they go to such lengths to introduce their Mr. Beast wannabe character, and that guy is axed halfway through the second issue. They've got their Kim Kardashian type, Ivy Derringer, and they build her up like 1/3 of all the products on this planet come from her, and she's such a big deal, and her pleasure planet is going to be such a big deal. It's like, yeah, she gets killed off early in the next issue. None of these characters matter. They put so much effort into putting them over, and then it's just like, yeah, we don't actually care. This person's dead now. We're moving on. And the story ends up being about the bald lackey and the military guy who's trying to contain it at the very end. It's not even about these people that they spend so much time building up.
Yeah.
Aliens Kidnapped number 3 was released on February 18th, 1998, and dropped to 9th place among Dark Horse titles. If you follow patterns, you can probably guess that the 4 Star Wars books were at the top. After that, your prestige creator-owned title, in this case Frank Miller, Dave Gibbons, with some other month maybe a Mike Mignola deal. After that, I didn't mention it last month, but Sergio Aragonés Gru has moved to Dark Horse and launched around the middle of their top 10. There's an overlap of Aliens miniseries this month, so a first issue sells better than the third. There's another Predator book, which typically sells less than a given Aliens book with all else being equal, but a first Predator will beat a third Aliens. And then after the Aliens stuff comes corporate IP like Ghost or manga like Gunsmith Cats. Having been doing this for going on 4 years, years, that's a fairly predictable pecking order. The Terminator Analysis show started earlier this year. Because that one isn't as Dark Horse-centric, I don't have my full bearings on how it stacks up against Predator. Even after all these years, though, Aliens remain near the top of the heap, but firmly displaced by Star Wars' greater popularity and sustainability across multiple titles. Star Wars thrives with more titles, where the glut of Aliens product around the third movie proved that the market really only wants one Aliens book at a time. But also, a decade in having the Aliens license, why pay 20th Century Fox so much money for a property that only reaches 147th place with sales of 14,686 copies? They could pull those numbers with Japanese reprints, a Paul Chadwick book, or some good girl art by a newcomer like Iban Race. Solicitation copy reads, how do you deal with an alien plague? The inhabitants of the pleasure planet Celeste take care of business with good old-fashioned nuclear weapons. They're a precocious bunch, to be sure, but as they scheme to rid themselves of the alien, the creature is spreading a new fatal airborne virus like wildfire. However they solve their problem, it will probably spell an apocalyptic end for the good citizens of Earth. One last trip to Xenopedia, Celeste is put under martial law by cyborg director Drummond. Meanwhile, after security eventually finds the creature, now deceased, Derringer's ship, which made an emergency return to Earth, crashes back onto Celeste after Derringer's chief of security suffers a bout of madness. Worse, Drummond is informed that the chestburster's residue secreted an incredibly contagious and deadly airborne virus, and that Celeste has been marked for nuclear destruction to quarantine the epidemic.
It's really fascinating that we're talking about it. And you say it's the Mr. Beast Joe Rogan guy and the Kim Kardashian woman. This is from 1999, right? And so it's really incredible the way that they called it with all this stuff, with the Joe Rogan and the panel. It also made me laugh when the Kardashian is talking to Joe Rogan and she's, oh, this is why I wanted to break my news on your show. And he's like, it's not a show, with quotes. And he's like, he's outing. I thought that was fantastic. All those little tiny character things, the hubris of the Joe Rogan guy and his.
It's not a show, it's an experience.
Right. It would have been easier to deal with if it wasn't so prophetic, but it's still.
But let's be honest, too. There's nothing new under the sun. Maybe this is Morton Downey Jr. and Charo to them at the time, and it just evolves into something that's recognizable to us as something else.
That's true. Yeah, but I did really appreciate the work they put into it, and the thing, even like the bartender and the stupid goons and everything. Everybody acts so believably, even if they're just like the white trash people hanging out in this bar. They're so believable as white trash hanging out in a bar, or dreadnoughts, or the barkeeper. All these different people. It's so great and it's so funny. The thing, I'm not trying to oversell it, but it's almost like this is a Return of the Living Dead versus somebody else's more serious Dawn of the Dead. You know what I mean? Like they have this. It's funny and it's gory and it's so character driven. Even though these characters don't go anywhere, they all get killed.
Well, I mean, again, like you start out the book with the redneck guys, and then we sort of leave them behind. You're like, oh, really? They're going to make it? And then, like, as an afterthought, it's like, no, we actually nuked that planet. All those people are dead now. They do resolve that. But yeah, I very much feel like this was a conscious effort to do a Dan O'Bannon style alien comic, and literally, like, the ending of the book is essentially the same ending as Return of the Living Dead, except with less irony. It's just played more like, well, sucks to be you kind of situation. So yeah, I think that was intentional. I have to assume that was intentional.
Yeah, I think it's funny and it's fun and it's gory. Like you said, there's a couple parts where I don't even know if it's provocative. I mean,
saucy.
It's something, but
it's a little saucy for an aliens book.
Yeah. I think it's great. And all these faces of all these weird characters. I mean, it's like a 70s ensemble cast. It's almost like these are all like Ernest Borgnine or Gene Hackman kind of faces in here. Everybody's got such character and such care put into all these different faces that are, some of them never come back, and they all get, eventually none of them are going to turn past this story, but it's incredible. I think it's really good.
The individual issues of Aliens Kidnapped cost $2.50 each. The trade paperback collection, with a new cover by John Bolton, was $9.95, with a release date of February 24th, 1999. So what's your paid?
Oh my God. I think I would have to... I think just because, as far as like hanging up on the wall, it'd be cool to have the Mr. Beast guy and his captive, and it's almost like the splash page, but I think I'd have to have one of the pages where like the guy's talking, he's complaining about how they fed him his own brain. So I would just reread that and laugh and have a good time.
I've got a couple of options depending on which one I could get. One is the introduction of the Ivy Derringer character, the buxom babe, because it's sort of like Solano Lopez doing Barbarella. Probably not the closest we were ever going to get. So this is the man in his element drawing sexy chicks, so that's definitely an option. But the other would have been the final page, where the military man realizes that he's hosed, goes out to have a seat out in the park, and just watches the nukes fall. I thought that was a nice page as well. So one of those two would be fine. I'm sure I'd be paying more for the one with the Buxom Babe than I would for the guy getting nuked. So I might take the deal, but I like them both.
Well, I love that guy is the android too.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, they call him. I think they call him a cyborg, which is like an whole other thing. I was like, we don't really do cyborgs in Alien, but okay, let's go with it. And he seems to be having a human emotion, but he's also. I'm not sure about his status.
Yeah. I thought that there is the thing that I'd have to flip back here because I made a note to follow up on this for myself and I didn't. But it seems like all the servants on the planet are like Asian. Yeah, I think that I'm flipping through. Servants are all Asian, which is weird because there aren't any other Asian people depicted in there. That kind of made me wonder what the heck was going on.
Yeah, because of his art style, I always read all of his characters as being Latino. You know, they all have some variation on Hispanic features. So it's like I have to consciously like recognize when somebody isn't necessarily intended to be such.
You know what? I might, if I didn't take the page of the guy talking about his own brain, I would take the page where the chest burster goes after the kids who are stealing the barrels of wine, and the one guy's like, "Yeah, we got blindsided by a little octopus." I thought that was also hilarious. Like, the whole approach to this series is just outrageous. I love everything about all these characters, even though they're all ghosts. I think it's great.
Well, again, you referenced Return of the Living Dead. You know, nobody makes it out of that movie alive either, but you still enjoy the time you spend with them.
Yeah, all those characters are unique and fun to be around while they're around. That's what this is like. I just don't understand why there's an alien on the cover of number 3 and they don't have the alien at the end. Must have been.
Get them sales.
Yeah.
Get them sales. Whatever it takes. Get them sales.
But it was fun. It was fun. I like the little elves or lizards in the jar. I like the humor. The title does bother me, but it's a weird. Maybe it'll reveal itself to me if I some more.
I wouldn't.
Maybe I can read Jim Woodard.
Don't. It's some things are just they are what they are. Simple as that.
Yeah, and I like that the woman. This is something that I've never seen in the rest of these omnibus stories I haven't seen. Is the female lead is it's her corporation. Like if you're talking about like there's a corporate entity and all these different stories, it's her. You know, and so I've never seen that before. So that was refreshing and a twist.
Well, and they do have her on the hook for investors, though. They make a big point of how she's got an investor meeting that she's missing because she's no longer among the living. So and that's also an element we don't really see. It's usually the one corporation just acting unilaterally and against the common good. So that's a different sort of dynamic too. To have like that sort of entrepreneur who's answerable to somebody, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
I do think it's a little weird though because the whole thing is about she's created this pleasure planet for the rich to go off and literally screw off. They end up nuking it, and usually you'd have some sort of socio-political message where it's like, well, they need to nuke it, but they don't because all these rich people have the ability to stop them from doing the things to the public good, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no, they all just got nuked. So it doesn't really matter if these are rich people or not. I guess aside from the point of being able to enjoy watching the rich people get nuked because they're of their own hubris. I guess that might be the angle there. Assuming that there was that much thought put into it in the first place. This was just mostly just a ride, it seemed like.
Yeah, I think it was more of a ride. Yeah, but there is the through line of hubris and capitalism and celebrity and I guess entitlement. Maybe that's the thing because everybody, those dreadnoughts think they're entitled to getting paid for that 13th egg, and Mr. Beast thinks he's entitled to to taste the egg. I guess I don't know why he's doing that, but the celebrity woman is entitled to her pleasure planet, and I don't know what the rest of it would be. The military is entitled to nuke whole planets. I don't know. It was fun though. I liked it.
Yeah, you're working too hard. Just let it be.
It was good.
Anna Adams, Billet Spy Vinyl, Bill aka The Bat Pod, Billy Hines, Comics Enabler, Cheesecake 1985, Chris at Bad Books for Beginners, Chris Dunford, Chris Lydon, Comic Foil, Dave's Comic Heroes Blog, Derek W.C., Dunyadan, Dirk Ashton has finished KRZ2, Thunder Kraken, Amon Doran, Ed Moore, Gavin Rizza, True Believer Yes, Hal Colbeck, Hicks, Huskeden. At last, someone finally covered this, referring to The Abyss. Jarrett Keane, Jean-Bernard Francois, JMT Productions, The Irredeemable Shag, Julia Raoul, Keith G. Baker, Lamar the Revenger, Lorenzo Sleestack, Meme Stealing Raccoon, Mike at Send Aliens to Me, Presidential candidate Kirk Spencer, Relatively Geeky Podcast Network, Sam the Excitement, Superbound, Talk Nerdy to Me, Twins Are Rising, Vaz, and William Voyage.
This has been a Rolled Spine podcast. All audio samples are believed covered under fair use laws. No copyright infringement is intended.
Coming in October, Dark Horse presents The Thing from Another World.